Mark was a man who lived by his principles: work hard, love deeply, and provide endlessly for his family. A lead designer at a reputable tech firm in Chicago, his days were filled with intense brainstorming sessions, client presentations, and deadlines that never seemed to end. Yet Mark never complained. He took pride in his work and saw it as a means to create a better life for his family, his wife, Linda, and their 7-year-old son, Leo. Linda was everything Mark thought he wanted in a partner. She was vibrant, charming, and always seemed to light up a room. They had been married for almost a decade, and although the grind of daily life sometimes took its toll, Mark believed their bond was strong. Then there was Leo, a curious and energetic boy who filled their home with laughter and endless chatter. Leo was fascinated by the world of video blogging. He loved imitating his favorite YouTubers, running around the house with his small phone camera, narrating his adventures. He was particularly fond of creating impromptu shows about the family dog, Rusty, or his latest toy cars. Leo made his videos just for himself. Given his young age, he has not yet posted his videos on the internet or maintained any social networks. "Hey, Dad, want to see my new video?" Leo would often say, thrusting his phone into Mark's hands. Mark always watched, admiring his son's creativity and enthusiasm. However, as much as he appreciated Leo's budding hobby, Mark couldn't ignore the fact that his son was spending too much time on his phone. One evening, as Mark relaxed in his home office, an idea struck him. It was time to set up parental controls on Leo's phone. He wanted to ensure Leo wasn't overusing it for games and to monitor his activity more closely. Mark picked up the phone from Leo's room while the boy was sleeping and started exploring its content. As he scrolled through a folder labeled videos, he couldn't help but smile at the thumbnails of Leo's antics. Curiosity got the better of him, and Mark began watching some of the videos. There was one where Leo gave an animated review of his favorite Lego set, and another where he pretended to interview Rusty. Mark chuckled to himself, admiring his son's vivid imagination. Then, he stumbled upon a video file without a title. It was dated just a few weeks ago, and the thumbnail showed a blurry image of their living room. Mark tapped on it, expecting another one of Leo's playful narratives. The screen flickered to life, and there was Leo, his bright round face filling the frame. His eyes sparkled with mischief as he leaned closer to the camera, his voice a playful whisper. "Hey followers," Leo began, grinning ear to ear. "Today, Mom is dating a dude named Chris, but it's a secret. I can't tell Dad so he doesn't get upset. Mom said not to say anything. If you want to know what happens next, like it." Mark stared at the screen, frozen. His first thought was that it must be a game, one of Leo's imaginative stories. After all, kids said the darndest things, right? He chuckled nervously, dismissing the strange pang in his chest. But curiosity nagged at him. He exited the video and scrolled through the others in the folder. One caught his eye. It was dated the same day as the last video, but had a slightly longer runtime. Mark hesitated for a moment before pressing play. The scene shifted. Leo stood by the window, his camera trained on the driveway. He zoomed in on Linda, who was walking toward her car, purse slung over her shoulder. "Here's Mom walking to her car," Leo whispered dramatically, as if narrating a spy movie. "I wonder where she and Chris are going. It's our little secret. I was given a bunch of candy and allowed to skip homework. Guys, I need to eat the candy fast because Aunt Sarah is coming to babysit me, and she forbids me sweets. Subscribe." Mark's breath caught in his throat. His initial amusement was quickly being replaced by something colder, heavier. His mind raced through possibilities, searching for a reasonable explanation. Maybe this was just one of Leo's elaborate games. Linda wouldn't. But then why was she leaving the house in the middle of the day? And who was Chris? Mark couldn't shake the strange sinking feeling that this wasn't imaginary. As much as he wanted to, he couldn't ignore the way Leo's tone had shifted in those videos. It wasn't playful, it was earnest, excited. And that part about the candy? It was too specific, too intentional. For the next few days, Mark couldn't stop thinking about what he'd seen. He started paying closer attention to Linda's behavior. She had always been vibrant and chatty, but lately he noticed moments where she seemed distracted. her phone always within arm's reach. She'd laugh at something on her screen, but quickly lock it when Mark entered the room. Her mood would shift unexpectedly, light and cheerful one moment, tense and guarded the next. And then there were the errands she'd run, often at odd hours. She had always been independent, but now her comings and goings seemed deliberate. Mark chose not to confront her. Not yet. He didn't want to make accusations without proof. But inside, doubt was festering. Every time he looked at Leo bouncing around the house with his smartphone, Mark felt a pang of guilt. His son was too innocent to understand the weight of what he had captured. Yet, in his own way, Leo had given Mark a glimpse into something he wasn't sure he was ready to face. Mark decided he needed time to think, to plan. Before you find out what happens next, please subscribe to the channel. After a sleepless night, he reached out to a private detective agency. A man named Rick Townsend, a seasoned investigator with a calm, no-nonsense demeanor, took the case. Rick listened carefully as Mark explained the situation, his voice tight with emotion. "I just need to know," Mark said, his tone barely above a whisper. Rick nodded. "I'll handle it discreetly. You'll have the truth soon enough." Over the next 2 weeks, Rick worked tirelessly. He trailed Linda during her errands, following her car from their suburban neighborhood to an upscale part of the city. She parked in the garage of an elite restaurant, La Ciel, a high-end establishment known for its exclusivity and glamour. There, Rick spotted her meeting a man, a tall, well-dressed figure with sharp features and an air of confidence. His name was Christopher, or Chris, as Mark would later learn. A successful restaurant owner, Chris exuded charm and wealth, his reputation well known in local circles. Rick didn't stop there. His surveillance uncovered a pattern. After their dinners, Linda and Chris would drive to a rented apartment not far from the restaurant. The detective captured photographs of their meetings, a candid shot of them laughing over drinks, another of them holding hands as they entered the apartment. He even recorded snippets of their conversations, subtle yet damning evidence of an intimate relationship. Despite her careful demeanor, using cash for transactions, parking in secluded spots, and keeping her phone on silent, Linda couldn't evade Rick's meticulous observation. When Rick delivered the file to Mark, the evidence was irrefutable. The pictures, the audio, even a note Chris had slipped her during one of their dinners. It all painted a heartbreaking picture. Mark stared at the photographs, his heart shattering with every image. He couldn't believe this was the same woman he had loved for so many years, the mother of his son. The betrayal was like a knife twisting in his chest. But what hurt even more was the role Leo had played, however innocent. For days, Mark spiraled into a deep depression. He struggled to focus at work, his once methodical mind clouded by anger and despair. At home, he felt like a stranger, unable to meet Linda's eyes without seeing the evidence of her infidelity. And Leo, his cheerful, oblivious son, became a painful reminder of the twisted secret that had infiltrated their family. Mark decided he needed to know more. One day, after Linda had stepped out to store, Mark sat down with his son in the living room. "Hey buddy," Mark said, forcing a smile. "Can we talk for a second?" Leo, who was playing a racing game on his tablet, glanced up. "Sure, Dad. What's up?" Mark hesitated, his heart pounding. "So, remember those videos you made? The ones about Mom and Chris?" Leo's face froze for a split second before he quickly returned to his game. "Oh, it's just a joke, Dad. I was pretending like I always do." Mark leaned forward, trying to keep his voice calm. "But you said some pretty specific things, bud. Stuff about candy and skipping homework. Did Mom tell you to say those things?" Leo shrugged, his attention still on the screen. "I don't remember. Can I go back to my game now?" Mark clenched his jaw. "Leo, this is important. I just want to understand. Who is Chris?" Leo set the tablet down, his small hands fidgeting. "Dad, I don't know. I don't want to talk about it." Mark sighed, leaning back in defeat. It was clear that Linda had coached Leo well, turning his natural playfulness into a shield for her secrets. Mark's frustration boiled over, but he reminded himself that Leo was just a child, a pawn in a situation far beyond his comprehension. "I'm not mad," Leo, Mark said softly. I love you. You know that, right? Leo nodded, but his eyes remained downcast. Mark wanted to say more, to assure his son that none of this was his fault, but the words caught in his throat. The betrayal had fractured something deep within him, and for the first time in his life, Mark felt utterly powerless. As Leo returned to his game, Mark sat there staring at the wall, the weight of the truth pressing down on him like a crushing tide. Mark spent days trying to wrestle his emotions into submission. Yet, he decided against confronting her in a heated argument. A messy scene would only worsen things, especially for Leo. He resolved to leave, not out of cowardice, but to salvage the pieces of himself that hadn't yet shattered. He called his supervisor at work and submitted his resignation. His colleagues were shocked. Mark was the cornerstone of their design team, but he gave no detailed explanation. He withdrew a modest amount of money from their joint account, just enough to cover rent and essentials for a few months. Then, while Linda was out again, Mark sat down at the dining table with pen and paper. He poured his heartbreak into a few succinct sentences. Linda, I know everything. You made your choice. Now I'll make mine. I'm leaving. I'll provide everything Leo needs. But for now, I need space to heal. I hope you can respect that. Mark. He placed the note where she would see it and packed a small suitcase. Then he took the boy to school, kissed him on the forehead. When it was done, Mark left. Mark drove aimlessly until he reached a quiet, small town 1 hour away. It was the kind of place where no one asked questions and everyone seemed too preoccupied with their own lives to notice a stranger. He rented a modest apartment and began the slow, agonizing process of piecing himself back together. When Linda returned home, she found the note on the kitchen counter. At first, she thought it was a joke, a dramatic gesture meant to guilt her into spending more time at home. But as she read the words again, their weight sank in. Her first instinct was to call Mark. When he picked up, his voice was calm but lifeless, like a man drained of everything that made him who he was. Mark, what is this? She demanded. You can't just leave like this. What do you mean you know everything? I mean exactly that, Mark replied, his tone flat. I know about you and Chris. Linda froze, her mind racing. What are you talking about? Did Leo say something stupid again? He's always making things up. You know how kids are. Leo has nothing to do with this, Mark interrupted firmly. This isn't about him. This is about you and the choices you made. Linda's voice grew sharper. So you're going to punish me by disappearing? By abandoning your son? What kind of father does that? I haven't abandoned him, Mark said quietly. I'll make sure he has everything he needs. But I can't be there right now. I'm leaving everything to you. The house, the savings, everything. I just need peace. Linda's anger flared. You think you can just vanish and leave me to deal with everything? That's not how this works, Mark. If you're leaving, fine. But we're going to make it official. I'm filing for divorce. And you'd better believe I'll be asking for alimony. Mark sighed. Do whatever you need to do. I won't fight you on it. Damn right you won't, Linda snapped before hanging up. Linda stormed into Leo's room, her face a mask of barely restrained fury. The boy, sensing her mood, shrank back on his bed. What did you tell your father? She demanded, her voice cold and accusing. Leo's eyes widened. Nothing, Mom. I didn't say anything, I swear. Don't lie to me, Leo, she shouted. You must have said something to him. You're always running your mouth, aren't you? Tears welled up in Leo's eyes. I didn't mean to do anything bad, he stammered. Of course you didn't, Linda said bitterly, her voice dripping with sarcasm. But now your father's gone, and it's all because you couldn't keep your mouth shut. Leo began to cry, but Linda ignored him, pacing the room as she vented her frustration. Do you have any idea what you've done? Do you? I've done everything for this family, and this is how you repay me? The boy curled into himself, sobbing quietly. After a few moments, Linda seemed to realize what she was doing. She sighed heavily, sitting on the edge of the bed. Just go to sleep, she muttered, her voice softer now but still tinged with frustration. We'll talk tomorrow. As she left the room, slamming the door behind her, Leo buried his face in his pillow. The envelope came on a gray Tuesday morning, delivered by a courier who knocked firmly at Mark's door. Mark, still groggy from a restless night, opened it to find a stack of divorce papers staring back at him. Linda wasn't bluffing. She wanted it all. Full custody of Leo, ownership of the house, the majority of their savings, and a hefty alimony payment based on the salary Mark had earned at his former job. For a moment, Mark felt the familiar despair creeping back in. But as he read through the demands, a spark of defiance flickered in him. This wasn't just about Linda anymore. It was about protecting his future and Leo's. Mark pulled out his phone and called the best family lawyer he could afford, a man named Michael Tate. Michael was a sharp, experienced attorney known for his tenacity in court. After their first meeting, Michael outlined his strategy. "Mark," he said, leaning forward, "you can't roll over and let her take everything. I'll make sure the custody arrangement is fair and that you're not bled dry financially. But I'll need to use the evidence we have. And frankly, I think we should request a DNA test for Leo. It's a precaution, but it strengthens your case." Mark balked at the idea. "A DNA test? No, Leo's my son. I don't want to put him through that." "I understand," Michael said calmly. "But Linda isn't playing fair. She's already painting you as the absentee father who abandoned his family. We need to make a strong case to protect you and Leo." Reluctantly, Mark agreed. He hated the idea, but he trusted Michael's judgment. When Linda learned that Mark had hired a lawyer, she was blindsided. She had expected him to quietly accept her terms, as he always avoided conflict. But when Michael submitted evidence of her affair with Chris, photos, recorded conversations, and a detailed timeline of her deceit, it completely derailed her narrative. "You had me followed?" Linda hissed at Mark during a tense hallway exchange outside the courtroom. "No," Mark replied quietly, "but the truth has a way of coming out." Linda's confidence wavered, but she pressed on, demanding full custody of Leo and the lion's share of their assets. Her argument hinged on Mark's recent unemployment and his decision to leave the family home, which she portrayed as abandonment. Michael countered by presenting the evidence of infidelity and arguing that Mark had left to avoid escalating conflict, not out of neglect. He also revealed Linda's demands for extravagant alimony, emphasizing that she was already financially stable and didn't require such support. Then came the request for the DNA test. Linda's face paled when it was brought up. "This is ridiculous," she shouted. "Leo is Mark's son." "If that's true," Michael said smoothly, "the test will confirm it. There's nothing to worry about." The judge ordered the test, much to Linda's fury. A few weeks later, the results came back. Leo was indeed Mark's biological son. Though relieved, Mark couldn't shake the sadness that it had even been necessary. After weeks of hearings, the court finally issued its decision. Joint custody was granted, though Mark and Linda reached a private agreement allowing Leo to choose where he would live and for how long. This arrangement was designed to minimize disruption to Leo's life and give him a sense of agency. Assets and finances. The house was sold, with the proceeds split fairly between Mark and Linda. The court recognized Mark's efforts to avoid conflict and his willingness to leave a larger share to Linda. Alimony was reduced to a minimal amount, reflecting Linda's infidelity and Mark's current employment status. Leo's best interests. The court emphasized that both parents needed to prioritize Leo's well-being. Though bitter toward each other, Mark and Linda agreed to shield Leo from further conflict. After the trial, Leo moved in with Linda full-time. Mark had agreed to let him stay with Mother. Mark kept his promises. He ensured Leo had everything he needed and called often to check in. But Leo's voice on the other end of the line was hesitant and uncertain, a far cry from his usual cheerful tone. Unbeknownst to Mark, Leo carried a heavy burden. Leo thought it was his fault that his dad had left and his parents had divorced. Linda, too, was slipping into her own darkness. When Chris learned that Linda was no longer married, his interest in her evaporated. To him, the allure of secrecy and danger had been the point. Without it, she was just another woman, and he moved on without so much as a goodbye. Heartbroken and humiliated, Linda fell into a deep depression. Her once vibrant personality dulled, and she began neglecting not only herself, but also Leo. Days blurred into each other, and small tasks like making dinner or helping with homework became insurmountable. Her friends and colleagues, who had once admired her, distanced themselves after learning about her affair and the trial's revelations. Leo felt the shift keenly. His once doting mother became distant, and he found himself alone more often than not. Occasionally, he would call Mark, his small voice trembling with uncertainty. "Dad," Leo whispered one night, "do you think I made everything worse?" The question shattered Mark. He realized just how deeply the situation had affected his son. "No, Leo," Mark said firmly, his voice gentle. "None of this is your fault. Not one bit. I love you, buddy, and if you ever want to come live with me, my door is always open." Though Leo didn't move in immediately, Mark's reassurance planted a seed of hope. Meanwhile, Mark was slowly rebuilding his life. He had opened a small design studio in the heart of the town, pouring his creativity into projects that gave him a sense of purpose. The studio wasn't just work, it was a sanctuary. One of his first collaborators was Victoria, a talented photographer and videographer with a keen eye for storytelling. Victoria was smart, driven, and down-to-earth. She and Mark clicked instantly, their creative energies complementing each other. At first, their relationship was strictly professional, but as weeks turned into months, the connection between them deepened. Victoria's warmth and humor became a balm for Mark's weary soul, though neither of them rushed anything. One day, during a casual conversation, Victoria learned about Leo's passion for making videos. She lit up with enthusiasm, offering to teach him new techniques if he ever wanted to learn. "That sounds great," Mark said with a smile, "but Leo's been through a lot. He's scared to pick up a camera again." "Well," Victoria replied thoughtfully, "sometimes all it takes is someone who believes in you." Encouraged by Mark, Leo started visiting his father more often. At first, he was quiet and withdrawn, but the safe, calm environment Mark created began to draw him out of his shell. Victoria's presence also helped. She treated Leo like a little brother, teaching him about lighting, angles, and editing whenever he showed interest. "Here," she said one afternoon, handing Leo one of her cameras. "Why don't you try this out? No pressure. Just have fun." Tentatively, Leo began filming again. Small things at first. A squirrel in the park, a funny moment with Mark. As he grew more comfortable, his videos became more ambitious. The spark that had once fueled his passion returned, and Leo's laughter began to fill Mark's home. Before long, Leo was spending most of his time with Mark, and eventually he moved in permanently. The boy's confidence blossomed, and Mark felt a renewed sense of purpose as a father. Linda's life, in contrast, continued to unravel. She felt the sting of judgment from her peers and the emptiness of her once active social life. The few remaining friends she had grew tired of her constant negativity and self-pity, leaving her even more isolated. The loss of Leo hit her the hardest. Though he still visited occasionally, the bond between them had frayed. She tried to make amends, but her depression and regret often got in the way. The weight of her choices bore down on her, and the world she had built for herself seemed to crumble. For Mark, the future looked brighter than it had in a long time. His studio was gaining traction, and his relationship with Victoria was evolving into something meaningful. More importantly, his connection with Leo was stronger than ever. Together, they were creating a new version of family, one built on trust, understanding, and love. Leo, too, found his footing. With Mark and Victoria's support, he rediscovered his passion and began make videos. This time, his videos have been posted online before. His channel grew slowly but steadily, and he started receiving positive feedback for his creativity and storytelling. Though the scars of the past remained, Mark and Leo were proof that even in the wake of betrayal, healing and growth were possible. In the months following Leo's move to live with Mark, Linda's life spiraled further out of control. Overwhelmed by guilt, loneliness, and the consequences of her choices, she turned to alcohol for solace. The vibrant, confident woman she once was seemed to disappear entirely. Her career suffered as her behavior became increasingly erratic. Mark, hearing about Linda's worsening condition from mutual acquaintances, felt a mix of anger and pity. He had every reason to leave her to face the consequences of her actions alone. But when he saw how much Leo still longed for a normal mom, Mark knew he had to act. Not for Linda, but for their son. With the help of some relatives, Mark intervened. Despite Linda's initial resistance, he arranged for her to enter a rehabilitation program, ensuring she had the support she needed. Slowly but surely, Linda began to heal. She completed the program and committed to sobriety, attending therapy to address not just her addiction, but the deep regrets that weighed on her. She often reflected on how much Mark had done for her, even after their marriage had fallen apart. His selflessness left her deeply humbled. Though Linda couldn't undo the damage she had caused, she found a renewed purpose in becoming a better mother for Leo. She began to rebuild her relationship with him, expressing her love and remorse through actions rather than words. And while she knew she could never fully repay Mark for what he had done, she would forever be grateful that he had stepped in when she was at her lowest. For Mark, helping Linda wasn't about rekindling their past. It was about ensuring a better future for Leo. In seeing her recover, he found a measure of peace, knowing that his son would now have the mother he deserved. And though their paths had diverged, Linda's healing became another testament to Mark's unwavering strength and compassion. Ben sat on the couch, trying to process what Jane had just told him. An entire month overseas for a business trip. It sounded serious. She explained that her boss had entrusted her with a critical project, and it required her to oversee things personally, far from home. Ben felt a mix of pride and longing. They hadn't spent that much time apart since getting married. They were a young couple, just 3 years into marriage, renting a modest little house on the outskirts of Dallas. It wasn't much, but it was cozy. They were both career-oriented, hustling to save for a down payment on their first home. Despite the long hours at work, they were in it together, and it made their bond feel solid. But lately, Ben had noticed a change in Jane. She was laser-focused on her career, working late, taking every opportunity to advance. "Why the sudden ambition, Jane?" he'd asked half-jokingly. She'd grinned, raising an eyebrow. "Because I'm going to earn more than you," she teased. "We're in a little competition, remember?" He had laughed, dismissing it as playful banter. But now, as he watched her pack with a determined look in her eye, he wondered if there was more truth to it than he'd realized. Jane had always been driven, but this was something else. She talked about how her ambition was being noticed, and how she was taking on tougher projects. She even hinted that she wanted to prove herself. Ben felt a surge of pride. He loved that she was so capable, so committed. As she packed, he joked, "I'll be expecting big checks to hit the account soon then. Ms. CEO in the making." Jane laughed and rolled her eyes. "You just wait," she said. "By the time I'm back, you'll be telling everyone your wife's the star employee." Her humor and confidence left him feeling reassured and excited for her. She gave him a warm hug, and for a moment he felt certain everything would be just fine. The morning of Jane's departure felt bittersweet for Ben. She'd packed her suitcase with precision, double-checking her passport and other essentials before she finally zipped it shut. Spain, a month there, sounded like a dream. When she told him, he couldn't help but feel a small pang of jealousy. Visiting Spain had been a long-time dream of his, but they'd always been too busy or too tight on money to make it happen. "Well, Spain sounds amazing, Jane," he said, giving her a supportive smile. "I hope you get a little time to see some of it." Jane grinned, brushing his hand before picking up her bags. "I'll bring you back a souvenir, maybe a taste of the culture." They shared a lingering kiss at the door. "Good luck with everything," he said, squeezing her hand. "Thanks, Ben." "Love you," she replied, giving him one last warm look before she turned and walked away. The first week without Jane went by in a quiet routine. They exchanged texts now and then, with Jane sending quick updates about work and how busy she was. It reassured him that things were going smoothly, even though he missed her more than he'd anticipated. By the time the weekend rolled around, Ben decided to do a big grocery run. With Jane gone, the fridge was emptier than usual, so he headed to one of the big supermarkets across town. As he wandered the aisles, checking items off his list, he found himself distracted, his mind slipping back to the empty house he'd been coming home to all week. He turned into an aisle, looking for coffee, when he heard a familiar voice call his name. Ben. Hey there. He looked up, surprised to see Megan, an old friend from college who always seemed to have a sunny smile and boundless energy. Megan. Wow. Long time no see, he said, smiling. Have you been? Great. I just got back from Miami. Funny running into you. Are you back already? Ben frowned, caught off guard. Back from where? She tilted her head, looking at him curiously. Miami. With Jane. I ran into her a few days ago with a guy. She told me you were down there for the week with some friends to unwind. Ben's smile froze. He forced a chuckle, trying to cover his shock. Oh right. Yeah. Just been busy. Work's been crazy since we got back. Megan's face softened. Well, don't let it get to you too much. Anyway, it was nice to run into her. And I'm glad you guys got to relax a bit. Take care, Ben. She waved and hurried off down the aisle, leaving Ben rooted in place. He barely remembered how he'd finished up his shopping. Megan's words replayed over and over in his mind on the drive home, each time leaving him more confused. Jane was supposed to be in Spain, but Megan had seen her in Miami, with a man. The rest of the weekend passed in a fog for Ben. Every time he tried to rationalize what Megan had said, another wave of doubt hit him. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe Jane's job had sent her to Miami briefly. Or maybe Megan just saw someone who looked like her. But the more he tried to shake the thought, the more it clung to him like a weight pressing down on his chest. By Monday morning, he couldn't take it any longer. He needed to know the truth. He decided to call Jane's office, not as her husband, but as someone else entirely. His hands were shaking as he dialed the number. Good morning, Comet Technologies. How may I direct your call? A young voice chirped on the other end. Ben took a deep breath, deepening his voice and trying to sound casual. Hi there. I'm an old client of Jane's. We lost touch, and I'm trying to get back in contact with her. Could you connect me with her? The secretary paused for a moment. Oh, I'm sorry, sir, but Jane is on leave right now. She'll be back in about 3 weeks. Ben froze, his heart pounding. Oh, really? I hadn't heard. Is everything all right? Oh, yes, the secretary replied cheerfully. Her husband hurt his leg or something, and she's taking some time off to help him recover. Really thoughtful of her. Can I leave a message for when she's back? Ben gripped the phone so tightly his knuckles turned white. No message, thank you, he managed, then hung up abruptly. He slumped back into his chair, trying to process what he'd just heard. 3 weeks of vacation. Not Spain, not work, not even a business trip. She told her office she was home with him, caring for him because he was injured. The story was so neatly spun, it almost sounded believable. And yet here he was, perfectly healthy, with no idea his own wife had told such an elaborate lie. Ben felt a burning fury rising within him. It was all becoming painfully clear. Jane had lied to him, created an entire fantasy to cover her tracks. Megan's story about Miami and now this. It all pointed to the same sickening conclusion. She was with someone else, living it up on a vacation, while he sat at home waiting like a fool. He clenched his fists, feeling a mix of anger and heartbreak. His first instinct was to call her and demand answers, to shout down the phone and tell her exactly what he thought of her betrayal. But a voice in his head held him back. He couldn't just confront her without thinking. Jane was smart, and he knew she'd be ready to spin a new lie in an instant if he didn't have proof. Worse, a direct confrontation could lead them straight to divorce, which would mean splitting everything, including the down payment savings. Calm down, Ben, he muttered to himself. He took a deep breath, letting the anger simmer, directing it into cold, deliberate thoughts. She was going to pay for what she'd done, he would make sure of it, but he'd have to be smart about it. Before you find out what happens next, please subscribe to the channel. The realization of Jane's betrayal lingered like a bitter taste. Ben couldn't sit through the rest of the workday. Each hour ticking by felt like an eternity. By noon, he'd made up his mind. He needed a plan, and he needed it now. He told his boss he wasn't feeling well and requested to leave early. Without wasting any time, he searched for the best-rated divorce lawyer he could find online, made the call, and within an hour he was sitting across from an attorney named Michael Grant. Michael was a calm, calculating man in his 40s, with a sharp gaze that told Ben he had navigated messy situations like this more than a few times. As Ben recounted everything, Jane's story about Spain, Megan's unexpected revelation about Miami, and the blatant lie she told her work, the lawyer listened closely, occasionally jotting notes. When Ben finished, Michael leaned back in his chair, his expression serious. "You have two options here, Ben," he began. "First, you can wait and gather solid evidence. If you can catch her in the act, it'll strengthen your case. This would allow us to make a claim to keep your assets intact, potentially even get damages for infidelity." Ben's fists clenched at the thought of waiting. "And the second option?" he asked, his voice tight. Michael nodded. "You act quickly and protect what matters most to you. Since your primary concern is the down payment savings, we can take steps to secure those funds without tipping Jane off. Once the funds are secure, we file for divorce, and she returns to find her options limited." Ben felt a sense of relief mixed with resolve. "The savings, that's the only thing I care about. It's my money too, and I won't let her take a cent of it if I can help it." The lawyer's eyes gleamed with understanding. "In that case, we'll need to act fast. Here's what you'll do." Over the next hour, Michael outlined a plan that would allow Ben to move the funds into an account solely in his name. The goal was to make sure Jane wouldn't be able to access it or lay claim to it once the divorce proceedings began. They discussed the specifics, making sure every step would be discreet. The lawyer assured him that the sooner he could start, the better the outcome. The following days were a whirlwind of preparation. Ben spent his evenings combing through their finances, carefully transferring funds, and following Michael's guidance to the letter. With each move, he felt a strange satisfaction, as though reclaiming the money was his first step toward reclaiming his life. By the end of the week, Ben's lawyer had finished drafting the divorce papers. The savings were securely protected out of Jane's reach. All that remained was waiting for her return, and when she walked through the door expecting life as usual, she would be greeted instead with the reality she'd created. Jane stepped out of the taxi with a spring in her step, her skin glowing with a perfect tan, and her head still buzzing with the memories of her business trip. The days had been filled with warm beaches, late nights, and the kind of carefree freedom she hadn't felt in years. Now, back on her own street, she was running through the lines she'd practiced. Something about how exhausting the work had been, the tight deadlines, how Spain's beautiful scenery had been wasted on her because she'd barely had a chance to see it. As she approached the house, she noticed a car parked in the driveway that she didn't recognize. A bit odd, she thought, but maybe Ben had a friend over. Shrugging it off, she dug her keys out of her purse and went to unlock the door. But before she could slide the key into the lock, the door swung open. Standing there was a woman, maybe in her mid-30s, with a warm, almost pitying smile. Beside her stood a young boy, around 10, wearing a backpack and clutching a basketball under one arm. The boy looked at Jane with curiosity, while the woman's gaze held something else entirely, something that made Jane's heart skip a beat. Caught off guard, Jane forced a polite smile. Excuse me? Who are you? And what are you doing in my house?" The woman's smile widened, but her eyes stayed sharp. "Oh, you must be Jane," she said brightly, as if greeting an old friend. Jane could only nod, her mind racing. She opened her mouth to say something, but the woman continued, her tone polite and firm. "Ben mentioned you'd be stopping by to pick up your things. I'm Dana, and this is my son Lucas." She gestured around the hallway, her voice light but steady. "We just moved in. Such a beautiful place." Jane felt the floor drop from under her. She released her suitcase, and it landed with a thud on the porch, her eyes wide with shock as her mouth worked soundlessly. "Moved in?" she managed to croak, feeling as though she was caught in some terrible dream. "What do you mean you moved in?" Dana tilted her head as if considering her words carefully. "Ben didn't tell you?" she said, her voice almost sympathetic. "We've been working on the details for the past week or so." He was so thoughtful, making sure everything was ready for Lucas and me to feel right at home. "I'm just here to keep everything cozy for him. Like a fresh start." Jane's heart raced, and her hands felt numb as she gripped the doorframe, unable to process what she was hearing. Her mind scrambled for some logical explanation. This was her house. Their house. Ben hadn't mentioned anything like this in the few brief messages they'd exchanged while she was away. But, she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. This is my home. I'm Ben's wife. Dana's expression softened, but there was a glint in her eye, a look that told Jane this woman knew exactly what was going on. Oh, I know, Dana replied gently, as if comforting her. Jane's hand shook as she pulled out her phone and dialed Ben's number, the walls of her world seeming to crumble with each unanswered ring. Finally, she heard his voice on the other end, calm and steady. Ben, she burst out, her voice trembling. What is going on? I come home and there's some stranger in our house with her kid. What is this? Ben's response was calm, almost too calm. Jane, I ended our lease. The house belongs to Dana and her son now. I figured it was time to make a clean break. Your things are in the garage, he continued coolly. Dana was nice enough to let me leave them there for you until you got back. You might want to thank her. Jane felt her pulse pounding in her ears. This couldn't be happening. She tried to gather herself, clinging to some scrap of dignity, but her voice cracked as she sputtered. Ben, what? What do you mean you ended the lease? Why would you? But Ben cut her off, his tone as cold as she'd ever heard it. Oh, and one more thing, he said almost conversationally. There's a folder with divorce papers waiting for you on the passenger seat of your car. Sign them whenever you're ready, honey, and I'll see you in court. Before Jane could get another word out, the line clicked, and the call ended. She tried to redial, but her calls didn't go through. He had blocked her. She looked down at her phone in stunned silence, and then the reality of the situation hit her like a wave, and she burst into tears. Dana, who had watched the whole scene with a calm, almost sympathetic look, stepped forward and placed a gentle hand on Jane's shoulder. I'm really sorry you're going through this, she said softly. Your things are right in the garage. I hope you find what you need. Jane couldn't even look at her. Her mind was a chaotic mess of disbelief, anger, and humiliation. She clutched her suitcase and stumbled toward the garage, where she found her things hastily packed into a few boxes in her car. Her hands shook as she picked up the folder, staring at the bold black letters on the front. Divorce papers. She let out a shaky breath, tears spilling down her cheeks. In one cruel moment, her whole world had been ripped apart. Without another glance back, she climbed into her car, clutching the wheel as she tried to steady herself. She needed somewhere to go, someone who could help her make sense of this nightmare. She took a deep breath, started the car, and drove away to her friend's place, tears streaming down her face the whole way. 5 days after the bombshell of Jane's return, Ben found himself in the courthouse, facing the woman he'd once vowed to love forever. The divorce proceedings had barely begun, but the tension between them was palpable. Jane was furious, blindsided by how he'd managed to protect the money they'd saved together. She hadn't expected him to act so decisively. Her frustration boiled over, and she resorted to ugly accusations, even calling him abusive and aggressive, trying to paint him as the villain. Ben, however, kept his composure. He'd come prepared, advised by his lawyer to stay calm and unresponsive to any of Jane's outbursts. Her angry words and scathing glares bounced off him as he kept his focus on one thing: his future without her. By the end of the hearing, he felt drained, but resolute. He needed a break. That evening, Ben met up with some old friends from college at a local bar. They settled into a booth, catching up and sharing stories. Ben only hinted at his divorce, offering vague details about irreconcilable differences, but nothing more. His friends, sensing he wasn't ready to dive into the whole mess, respected his privacy. They shared a few laughs, trading stories about work, life, and the usual jabs that came with old friendships. As the night wore on, one of the guys, Ryan, excused himself to the restroom. Ben leaned back, eyeing him as he left. Ryan looked tan, almost unnaturally so. Grinning, Ben joked to John, "Hey, what's up with Ryan? He looks like he's fresh out of a tanning bed or something. Or maybe he's hitting the bronzer like a bodybuilder before a competition." John chuckled, rolling his eyes. "Yeah, he does look like a wannabe beach bum. doesn't he? I think he's been on some vacation with a girl. Miami, maybe? He wouldn't say much, just dodged around it. At that moment, something in Ben clicked. The mention of Miami stirred a feeling he couldn't ignore. He turned to John, his expression hardening. Wait, you said Miami? Yeah, John replied, sensing Ben's sudden shift in mood. Why? Ben's jaw tightened. Because Jane was supposedly in Miami, too. With some guy. John's eyes widened, realization dawning on him. Hold up, are you saying that maybe Ryan and you're Jane? Ben's silence was enough. John's expression hardened. That's a serious betrayal, man. What happened to our code? Ben's mind raced. If Ryan had been Jane's secret vacation companion, then the truth might be sitting right in Ryan's phone. A plan began to form, and Ben leaned forward, nodding toward the bathroom. Listen, I've got an idea. When he comes back, I need him to unlock his phone. I'll grab it just long enough to look. Think you can hold him if things get ugly? John smirked, nodding. I've got your back. A few minutes later, Ryan returned, taking his seat and grabbing his drink. Ben kept his tone light, feigning interest. So, Ryan, you've got to share some vacation tips. I'm thinking of going somewhere warm myself. Ryan, caught off guard, chuckled nervously. Oh yeah, man, just the usual spots. Oh come on, Ben pressed. Show me some of those beach photos. Give me some ideas for my next trip. Reluctantly, Ryan pulled out his phone and unlocked it to scroll through his photos. But before he could react, Ben reached over, snatching the phone from his hand in one swift motion. Whoa, what are you doing? Ryan said, reaching for the phone. But John and the others moved in, blocking him. Just a quick peek, buddy, Ben said, voice cold as he quickly scanned the gallery. His heart sank as he found exactly what he'd feared. A series of photos of Ryan and Jane laughing together on a beach, sharing drinks at a bar. Their smiles too familiar, their poses too close. He flipped through photo after photo, each one driving the knife deeper. Ryan's panicked voice faded into the background as the full truth hit Ben like a tidal wave. Without hesitation, Ben began forwarding every photo of Ryan and Jane from the phone to his own. The images were a painful confirmation of what he'd feared. Beach scenes of them lounging together, clinking glasses at bars, laughing, even selfies with arms around each other that left no doubt about their closeness. Ben, come on, give it back, Ryan stammered, reaching for the phone. But John and the others held him firmly in his seat, their faces stony with disgust. To this group of friends, loyalty was a code, one they'd sworn to uphold since college. They had all dated and married, and one rule remained sacred: never touch another friend's girl. But Ryan apparently had crossed that line without a second thought. As Ben continued scanning the phone, he opened the messaging app and quickly found a long thread of exchanges between Ryan and Jane. He felt his stomach twist as he skimmed through the messages, flirty texts, late-night conversations, and thinly veiled excuses Jane had made about her business trip. There it all was, neatly hidden in plain sight. He sent everything to his phone, ensuring he had undeniable proof. Finally, Ben tossed the phone back to Ryan. Here you go. Thanks for the memories. The tension at the table was thick as the rest of the guys turned their attention to Ryan, their faces hard with anger and disappointment. One of the guys, Nate, shook his head, disgust clear on his face. Man, we had a code, he said, voice low and biting. We all agreed that you don't go near another man's wife. But you threw that all out for what? Ryan sputtered, his face flushed. It's not what it looks like. Save it, John cut him off sharply. We're looking at the pictures, Ryan. It's exactly what it looks like. I never thought you'd pull something like this. Ryan tried to defend himself, his words stumbling as he attempted to excuse his actions. It wasn't serious. I mean, I didn't think. Didn't think? Ben interrupted, his voice as cold as steel. He locked eyes with Ryan, a faint hint of anger in his otherwise calm expression. You didn't think about loyalty or friendship or honor. You just thought about yourself. The group sat in an uncomfortable silence, the weight of Ryan's betrayal settling over them. Finally, Ben stood, looking down at Ryan with a smirk of grim realization. You know, Ryan, a while ago I'd have knocked you out for this. But I don't need to. I know you'd just go running to the cops, crying about how I hurt you. Ryan flinched, but Ben only shook his head. So go to hell, Ryan. As far as I'm concerned, you're a rat, a stranger. With that, Ben turned and walked away, and the rest of the group followed, leaving Ryan sitting alone, his face a mixture of shame and humiliation. That night, Ben had what he needed, the photos, the messages, all the proof he could ask for. At the next court hearing, Ben presented every last detail, laying it out plainly for everyone, including Jane, to see. The look on her face when she saw the photos and messages was a strange mixture of shock, anger, and despair. She knew that her last shred of defense was gone. The divorce was swift after that. Ben retained their savings, and Jane's betrayal left her with little leverage to fight back. After the divorce was finalized, Jane and Ryan tried to keep their relationship alive, clinging to whatever had brought them together in the first place. But, unsurprisingly, the thrill quickly faded. Within 2 months, they drifted apart, the weight of their actions and the loss of their reputations leaving their bond shallow and hollow. Meanwhile, Ben was free, and life moved forward. Mutual friends and acquaintances had learned about what happened, and many of them chose to distance themselves from Jane and Ryan. They'd crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed, and the social fallout was heavy. No one could look at them the same way. For Ben, the betrayal had cut deep, but he knew he was better off. He'd gained clarity, peace, and a fresh start, finally free from a marriage built on lies. He took a deep breath, letting it out slowly, knowing that the future now belonged fully to him. If you enjoyed the story, please subscribe to the channel. I wish you a great mood and good luck.